Hey, it's Kabir here. So in today's session, we are going to understand about component in React. So before understanding the component in React, first of all, we have to understand some two concepts, and that concepts are nothing but your JSX and element. You have to know what is JSX and what is element. First one is what is JSX, and second thing, what is element. So JSX stands for JavaScript and XML. It is a syntax. It is one kind of syntax. Just you have to remember, just consider JSX is nothing but one syntax. Okay. So JSX stands for JavaScript XML. So what is JSX? It is a way to represent your JavaScript code with XML elements or user-defined elements. What is JSX? Just JSX is nothing but combination of JS code plus XML, means user-defined code. So we are going to represent a variable with JavaScript code and XML. How to represent? Just see here. I'm going to declare one const. I'm going to declare element or ELE equals to, I'm going to write one HTML tag. As you know that HTML is derived from XML. So we can write HTML. I'm writing H2. Okay. Now in this two, I'm telling my name is something, some input. Okay. Some data. And I'm closing my H2 tag. Now what we did here, we have declared one element, one variable. In this variable, we are storing one HTML tag and one this particular thing is called expression. So we are storing one HTML tag and one expression in a variable. So this is how we are going to define JSX. It's just a brief introduction of JSX. We will be doing in future, like we will be doing some sessions on JSX, which will be very depth. We will understanding in and outs of JSX. So as of now, if someone asks you what is a JSX, JSX is a way to represent your JavaScript and XML code, right? Now in this JSX syntax, we have a variable ELE. Normally in JavaScript, when you are going to define like you're going to define something like where a equals to Kabir. Okay. So you are saying that I have declared one variable known as a, which is going to store the value Kabir. So in same way in JSX, whatever variable we are declaring, it is storing JS code plus your XML code. And this particular variable in terms of React is called as element. In terms of React, it is called as element. Whereas this particular term in this particular thing in term of your JavaScript is called as variable. So now you have understood what is variable, sorry, what is element and what is JSX. JSX is a syntax. It is an extension of your JavaScript syntax, which is going to represent the combination of your JavaScript code plus XML code, right? And what is element? Element is something which is written, which is going to store some UI, like it describes some UI. See, this is const e. Now what this is describing? This is describing the name of some person in H2 format. So it is describing some kind of UI. So if you summarize what is JSX and what is your element in React, first thing, JSX is a syntax, some kind of syntax or a format where you are going to represent something with the combination of your JavaScript and XML. When it comes to your element is something which describes a piece of UI. It's not complete UI, but a piece of UI. Okay. Now let's comes to our main concept. What today we wanted to discuss is nothing but component. What is component? A component is nothing but a piece of UI or an independent UI in your web application. What is the meaning of that? Let us consider we have one web application. I have web application. Now this web application is going to look something like, okay, I have one header part. Okay, I have header part. Then I have some footer part. That's fine. We have the footer. Then this middle section is considered as your main part. In this main part, I am dividing into one more section known as side nav. So let's represent it with some names. It would be very easy for us. So it's something like, let's use some different color. Header. Okay, it's a header. This is considered as a header, and this particular part is considered as main, and this particular part is considered as your footer, right? And this particular part is considered as your side nav, something like. Cool. Now our web application has been divided into some sections. In the React world, these particular sections are called components. So we call it has header component, this has footer component, this has main component, and this has side nav component. So if you want to define component, how it would be? Component is just a piece of code to represent a particular UI. Like, what is component? Component is a piece of code which represent some UI. This is what we have understood from this explanation. But when it comes to a technical term, what is component? According to documentation of React, component is nothing but a simple JavaScript function. JavaScript function which is going to take some input and that input is in the format of object. That's why I have took previous session on JSON. What is JSON? What is object? How to do CRUD operations, because that is very important. In the entire series, we are going to understand it. So as of now, component is nothing but a simple JavaScript function or a class, we can say, which is going to take some input and return back a UI, some kind of UI, right? This is a technical definition, or we can say return back an element, right? What is element? Element is something which describes UI, means basically it is going to return some UI. So how can we define it? Just we will write a basic example of that. Okay, I am taking one function for Java. What I told, component is a JavaScript function. So let's define a function. Okay, function some header. Okay, we'll take header component. It is a function. Cool. I told it is a function. Component is a JavaScript function which is going to take some input. So how can we give an input to our any JavaScript function using the parameters, right? So I am taking some input, and technically that particular input in your React world is called props. Yes, this is called a props. Now, how can we define? A component is a simple JavaScript function which is going to take props as an input and which is going to return. This is going to return some UI. So what UI? So I'm taking a div, and this div I'm writing here like some h1. Okay, this is a React. So I'm saying h1 React world. Okay, that's cool. React world. So I'm closing h1 tag. Now I'm saying I'm taking some paragraph. Okay, now I'm giving some kind of stuff here. Now I'm taking one button tag and I'm representing this button like click me. This is the button, and I'm closing this particular div. Everything is wrapped in the div. Cool. Now I have defined one function, okay, with taking some input known as some props and returning back some element. Some element means some UI. Now this is not normal function. In React world, this particular thing is called component. So how can you define a component? A component is a JavaScript function or a class which is going to take an input as a prop and going to return an element. That element is going to describe some UI, a piece of UI. Okay, this is particular is called as component. Then this is component. Okay, now this particular, you are able to see, right? This particular thing, right, is called element, right? This particular thing is called element, which is describing some UI. This is your element, right? And this particular syntax defining everything in element, okay, this particular syntax is called your JSX code. This particular syntax is called JSX code. This particular syntax is going to call as JSX format or JSX code, we can say. So this is what I wanted to explain. Now you understood what is a component. It is a piece of code which is going to return back some UI, some element, and that element is going to describe you a piece of UI. And that particular element syntax is called JSX because it is a combination of user-defined element plus JavaScript code. As of now, we didn't use any JavaScript code, but in future sessions, we are going to use it. Okay, so you have to remember these three concepts. In next concept, like in next session, we are going to create a component in a VS Code. Practically, we will see how we have to create a component and how this component is going to display in your browser. So that's it for this session, and don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and bye guys.